My girlfriend rejected my proposal, saying her career came first. Years later, she showed up single at my office while I was picking up my new wife for lunch. So, my girlfriend looked me dead in the eyes at our favorite restaurant and said no to my proposal. Not because she didn't love me, but because partnership track at a Boston law firm doesn't leave room for someone else's needs. I just nodded, put the ring back in my pocket, and walked away. What happened next showed me I'd dodged something way worse than heartbreak. I'm Nate, 31 years old, high school history teacher and assistant football coach in a suburb outside Boston. Claire was 29, corporate attorney at one of those firms where they measure your worth in billable hours and how many weekends you sacrifice. We'd been together 3 years, lived together for 18 months in my modest two-bedroom near the school. Our relationship worked in this weird way where opposites actually complemented each other. Sunday mornings, she'd spread case files across our kitchen table while I made pancakes, and we'd argue about legal precedents versus historical context like it was foreplay. She'd help me grade essays on the Civil War while I'd cook dinner and listen to her vent about impossible partners and client demands. We weren't one of those couples who finished each other's sentences, but we had rhythm. I thought we had a future. Turns out I was the only one thinking that. The thing about Claire was that she never did anything halfway. When she argued a point, she researched it exhaustively. When she committed to a workout routine, she followed it religiously. When she decided she wanted partnership at her firm, she mapped out a 5-year plan with quarterly milestones. I found that intensity attractive at first. Someone who knew what they wanted and went after it. Someone who didn't float through life waiting for things to happen. I respected her ambition. I just didn't realize I wasn't part of the plan. Looking back, the signs were there. She'd cancel dinner plans last minute for client calls. She'd bring her laptop to every vacation and spend half the time on work calls by the hotel pool. She'd get irritated when I suggested she take a day off because she didn't understand what rest was for. I told myself these were temporary sacrifices for a bigger goal. That once she made partner, things would calm down. That we'd get our life back. But there was always going to be another case. Another client. Another milestone that required all of her attention. I just didn't see it until she spelled it out for me at that steakhouse. The proposal happened at the steakhouse we'd been going to since our 4th date. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. The kind of place where the waiters recognized us and remembered that she liked extra bread, and I always ordered the ribeye medium rare. I had my grandmother's ring in my jacket pocket, the one my mom had been holding onto for years, waiting for me to find the right person. I'd driven an hour to my parents' house 2 weeks earlier just to pick it up. My mom cried when I told her why I was there. She said she always knew Claire was special, that she could see how much I loved her. I wish she'd been wrong. My dad shook my hand and told me he was proud of the man I'd become. Said that finding someone to build a life with was the best decision he ever made. That my mother had been his rock through every hard time, every career setback, every family crisis. He told me that the right partner doesn't just make the good times better, they make the hard times survivable. I thought Claire was that person. I thought wrong. The waiter had just cleared our plates when I reached for the small velvet box. My heart was doing that nervous, excited thing where you know you're about to change everything. My palms were sweaty. I'd rehearsed what I was going to say maybe 50 times in the mirror that morning. I had this whole speech planned about building a life together, about partnership, about how I couldn't imagine my future without her in it. Then I saw her face change. It wasn't happiness or surprise. It was something closer to panic. Like I just told her the building was on fire. She asked what I was doing. Her voice had this edge I'd never heard before. Cold, almost clinical, like I was a client presenting a bad contract instead of the man she'd shared a bed with for the past 18 months. I was already halfway out of my chair, box in hand, telling her I was asking her to marry me. The restaurant went quiet, in that way places do when someone notices a proposal happening. Every head turned. People were smiling, waiting for the beautiful moment. Some woman 3 tables over already had her phone out, ready to capture the magic. She looked at the ring, at me, at the ring again, and tears started forming. But they weren't the right kind of tears. These weren't happy tears. These were the tears you cry when you're about to do something you know is going to hurt someone. I can't, she whispered, loud enough that the couple next to us definitely heard. The woman with the phone lowered it slowly. I sat back down, feeling like I'd just been punched in the stomach by someone who apologized while doing it. The whole restaurant was watching now. I could feel their eyes on us, the secondhand embarrassment radiating from every direction. I asked her if it was can't or won't, keeping my voice steady even though everything inside me was collapsing. That's the thing they don't tell you about heartbreak. In the moment, you don't cry or scream. You just go numb. Your brain throws up this wall to protect you from processing what's actually happening. So I sat there, calm and controlled, asking clarifying questions like we were negotiating a lease. My voice didn't shake. My hands didn't tremble. I was a statue made of flesh, completely hollow inside, but perfectly composed on the outside. She took a shaky breath and laid it all out with the same clinical precision she used in contract negotiations. 80-hour weeks weren't optional. They were expected. Networking events, client dinners, emergency motions filed at midnight. The partners watched everything, judged everything, and marriage meant divided attention. She told me marriage was compromise, and I could see she'd thought about this before, probably rehearsed it. Just like I'd rehearsed my proposal, she'd rehearsed her rejection. That realization hit harder than anything else. She knew this was coming. She knew I was going to propose, and she came to dinner with her answer already prepared. It meant someone else's schedule, she continued, someone else's emergencies, someone else's family obligations. She couldn't afford that right now. Not if she wanted to make partner. She was on the partner track, she explained, the youngest associate ever seriously considered. This merger case coming up would make or break her career. She couldn't have distractions. She couldn't split her focus. The firm demanded everything, and she was willing to give it. The way she explained it made it sound so logical, so reasonable, like she was just being practical, like anyone in her position would make the same calculation. But the thing about logic is that it doesn't account for the human being sitting across from you with a ring in his pocket and his heart on the table. Logic doesn't care about Sunday morning pancakes, or the way someone knows exactly how you like your coffee, or 3 years of building something you thought was permanent. I tried every angle I could think of, sitting there with my grandmother's ring still in my hand like an idiot. Long engagement, no timeline. We could wait until after she made partner. I didn't need an answer right now. I just wanted to know she saw a future with me in it. No kids until she was ready. 5 years, 10 years, whatever she needed. She could keep her last name. We didn't have to change anything that mattered to her professionally. I wasn't trying to hold her back. I just wanted to be there. She shook her head at each suggestion, and I watched her attorney brain dismantle every compromise like she was marking up a contract with red ink. She called them band-aids, inadequate solutions to a fundamental incompatibility. She said I was asking her to choose, so she was choosing her career. The thing that got me wasn't the rejection itself. People get rejected all the time. It was how clearly she'd already made this decision. This wasn't a surprise proposal she needed time to think about. This was her drawing a line between what mattered most and what mattered less. I mattered less. I mattered less than billable hours and partnership tracks and corner offices. I put the ring box back in my pocket and signaled for the check. The waiter came over looking absolutely mortified. I don't think anyone in that restaurant was breathing. I didn't yell. Didn't try to change her mind. Didn't make a scene that would give the other diners something to talk about for weeks. Although, let's be honest, they were going to talk about it anyway. I thanked her for being honest, for not wasting more of my time. Those words came out of my mouth, but I barely remember thinking them. My brain was on autopilot. Her eyes went wide, like she'd expected me to fight harder, to beg, to prove my love through persistence. All those romantic comedies where the guy makes some grand gesture and the woman realizes she was wrong and runs into his arms. She expected that. She wanted that. Not because she wanted to say yes, but because it would validate that she was worth begging for. If I have to convince you to marry me, Claire, then you're not the person I should be marrying. Those were my exact words. I remember them because they surprised even me. Where that clarity came from in that moment, I still don't know. I paid the bill. The waiter didn't even make eye contact. I walked her to her car in the parking lot because even heartbroken, I was raised with manners. The night air was cold, February in Boston, the kind of cold that bites through your jacket and settles in your bones. I watched her sit in the driver's seat without starting the engine. Her hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I told her I hoped she made partner, that I really hoped it would be everything she needed it to be. I meant it. Even then, even feeling like my chest had been hollowed out with a melon baller, I meant it. She drove away, and I stood there in the parking lot of our steakhouse, watching her taillights disappear, understanding something fundamental about love. Sometimes loving someone means accepting that you're not what they need, even when you wish you were. I thought that was the end of our story. Clean break, mutual respect. Two people wanting different things from life. Sad? Sure, but mature. Adult. The kind of breakup you tell people about, and they nod and say at least you found out now instead of 10 years from now. But then her assistant called me 3 days later, accidentally meant to dial someone else in the office. During that confused 30-second conversation before we realized the mistake, I learned something that made my blood run cold. Claire had been on the phone with the senior partner at her firm the morning of our proposal, before we even got to the restaurant, before I'd even put on my jacket. She told him she was prepared to make difficult personal sacrifices to prove her commitment to the firm. He'd apparently asked if she had any personal entanglements that might interfere with the upcoming merger case, the one that would determine partnership track. She'd said no. She'd said no. before I even asked the question. The proposal wasn't a surprise that threw her off balance. It was an inconvenient confirmation of something she'd already decided to eliminate. I wasn't a person she loved but couldn't prioritize. I was an obstacle she'd already planned to remove. That realization changed everything about how I understood our ending. This wasn't a woman torn between love and ambition. This was a woman who'd already made her choice and was just waiting for the right moment to execute the exit strategy. I was a line item she'd already decided to cut from the budget. The anger I felt wasn't hot. It was cold. The kind of anger that doesn't make you want to throw things. It makes you want to delete someone from your life completely. Every photo, every memory, every piece of evidence that they ever existed. I didn't do that, but I wanted to. Instead, I just sat with the truth of what she'd done. Let it settle into my bones. Let it transform whatever feelings I still had for her into something harder and less forgiving. Here's what this first part reveals about relationships and self-respect. When someone treats your proposal like a business problem they've already solved, that's not love struggling against circumstances. That's someone who made their choice before you even asked the question. Walking away with dignity sometimes says more about your character than fighting for someone who's already let you go. Claire threw herself into work like someone running from a crime scene. Within a week of our breakup, she'd taken on the massive merger case her firm had been planning, the one that would make or break her partnership chances. 14-hour days became the norm, then 16. Then she stopped going home at all on weeknights, sleeping in the break room on the uncomfortable couch that smelled like old coffee and desperation. Our mutual friends started feeding me updates without me asking. The kind of concerned observations people share when they're watching someone self-destruct in slow motion. She was first in the office every morning, last to leave every night, sometimes sleeping on the couch in the conference room instead of going home to her expensive downtown apartment. Coffee from the vending machine. Take out sushi at her desk eaten cold, because she kept forgetting about it until midnight. Her entire life compressed into billable hours and client meetings. One friend told me she'd handled 3 high-profile cases simultaneously. She flew to New York twice a week. Looked like she hadn't slept properly in months. Dark circles under her eyes. Lost 15 pounds she didn't have to lose. She was proving her dedication to people who measured human worth in spreadsheets. People who would replace her in a heartbeat if she died at her desk tomorrow. Meanwhile, I was falling apart in a completely different way. I couldn't stay in our apartment. Not with her coffee mug still in the cabinet, and her books on the shelf and the ghost of her rehearsing legal arguments in the shower every morning. That apartment was a museum of someone who decided I wasn't worth keeping. Every corner had a memory I didn't want anymore. She'd packed her things while I was at school one day, left her key on the kitchen counter with a note that just said, "Thanks for understanding." Like I'd done her a favor by getting my heart shattered. The emptiness hit harder than I expected. Not because I wanted her back. I didn't. The assistant's phone call had cured me of any romantic delusions. But because the space we'd built together suddenly felt like a crime scene, a place where something died. I handled it the way I handle most things, by pouring myself into work until there wasn't room left for feelings. Not exactly healthy, but effective in the short term. I started staying late at school, running extra study sessions for kids who were struggling, volunteering for every committee and event that needed supervision. I coached morning practices and afternoon practices, and helped organize the winter formal, and somehow ended up advising the debate team, even though that wasn't technically my job. The principal asked if everything was okay at home. I told her I just loved my work. She didn't believe me, but she also didn't push it. The students kept me going when I wanted to collapse. These kids who showed up every day with their own problems, parents going through divorces, financial stress, friends making bad decisions, they didn't care about my broken heart. They just needed someone to show up for them. And showing up for them gave me a reason to get out of bed when I didn't have one for myself. There was this one kid, Junior. Started the year as a bench warmer with an attitude problem. His dad had just walked out and his mom was working double shifts just to keep the lights on. He came to practice angry every day. Picked fights with teammates, talked back to coaches. Most people would have written him off as a lost cause. But I saw something in him that reminded me of myself at that age. That desperate need to prove you mattered to someone. So I kept showing up for him. Extra practice sessions, rides home when his mom couldn't pick him up, long conversations about life that had nothing to do with football. By the end of the season, he was starting varsity, got his grades up enough to qualify for a scholarship. He hugged me after the championship game and said I was the only adult who didn't give up on him. That moment meant more to me than any relationship ever could. That's when I realized maybe I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The school became my refuge. The students became my purpose. And somewhere in all that activity, I forgot to be miserable. Or at least I forgot to notice I was miserable. Same difference when you're in survival mode. One of my players mentioned it in the locker room after practice, not knowing I could hear him from around the corner. He told his teammate that coach seemed different lately, more intense but in a good way, like he actually saw them as people instead of just athletes running plays. That comment stuck with me because it was true. Losing Claire had stripped away some protective layer I didn't know I'd built, made me more present for everyone else because I had nothing left to save for myself. All that energy I'd been pouring into a relationship with no future could now go to kids who actually wanted to be there. Kids who appreciated showing up for them. I couldn't stay in our apartment long term, though, not with her absence screaming from every corner. I spent 3 weekends repainting the walls in colors she would have hated, warm earth tones instead of her preferred minimalist gray. I replaced the furniture we'd picked out together with stuff from estate sales and secondhand stores. Things that had history, but not our history. A leather armchair from an old man's estate, a coffee table from a family that was downsizing, pieces with stories that had nothing to do with Claire. I hung photos of my family, my team, trips I'd taken before we met, turning the space into something that belonged only to me. It was mine now, not ours, just mine. And that felt liberating in a way I hadn't expected. Our mutual friends drifted away naturally, not because of drama, but because staying neutral meant choosing distance. When you break up, people feel like they have to pick sides even when you tell them they don't. I didn't fight it, didn't try to maintain connections that required explaining or choosing. Sometimes healing means letting go of everything connected to the wound, even the good parts. About 9 months after the breakup, I heard through the grapevine that Claire made junior partner, youngest in her firm's history, exactly like she planned. Someone told me she celebrated alone in her downtown high-rise apartment with expensive takeout from that place she loved. No one to share it with because everyone who mattered was still at the office. She'd achieved her goal, and the hollowness of that victory wasn't lost on anyone. Watching her dating life became this pattern people noticed, but nobody mentioned directly. She went out with another attorney from a rival firm, someone equally successful and driven. Their relationship apparently operated like a business merger, scheduled dinners when calendars aligned, conversations about case strategy instead of emotions, intimacy planned around court deadlines. It lasted 4 months before dying of neglect. Neither of them fought for it. Neither of them noticed it ending until it was already gone. Then a surgeon who worked the same brutal hours she did. And according to mutual friends, they managed maybe 3 actual dates in 6 months, because someone always had an emergency. Their relationship was a series of rain checks and apologetic text messages. A relationship in name only. 2 people who liked the idea of being together, but never actually were together. I heard through the network that she'd started noticing something at firm events. Partners who brought their spouses and kids weren't the ones struggling. They were thriving. They left at reasonable hours for soccer games and recitals, came back refreshed, closed deals with clear heads. The ones working 100-hour weeks looked exhausted and made sloppy mistakes. Having something worth going home to didn't destroy ambition. It focused it. That realization seemed to shake something in her carefully constructed belief system. The whole foundation of why she'd rejected me was crumbling under the weight of actual evidence. I met Sophie at a school literacy program almost 2 years after everything fell apart. She was a children's librarian, volunteering her time to help struggling readers. And I was there supervising students who needed community service hours. She had this way of talking to kids that made them feel capable instead of broken, turning reading challenges into adventures instead of failures. The program met every Tuesday and Thursday after school. Kids from the elementary school across town would come to our library for tutoring. Most of them were a couple grade levels behind. Some had learning disabilities nobody had bothered to diagnose. Some just never had anyone at home who read with them. Sophie treated every single one of them like they were capable of greatness. Like struggling with a picture book today didn't mean anything about who they could become tomorrow. I watched her spend 40 minutes with a 3rd grader who couldn't get through a picture book, celebrating every successful word like it was a miracle, patient without being condescending, encouraging without being fake. And something in my chest unclenched for the first time in months. A knot I didn't even know was there started to loosen. She had dark hair that she kept in a messy braid, glasses she was constantly pushing up her nose, a laugh that was too loud for quiet libraries but perfect for everywhere else. She talked with her hands when she got excited about a book. She remembered every kid's name after meeting them once. She was nothing like Claire. And that turned out to be exactly what I needed. We started talking during breaks. Casual conversation that turned into coffee, that turned into actual dates where we did normal things like mini golf and farmers markets and used bookstores. Our first real date was at a secondhand bookstore, where we spent 3 hours recommending books to each other and forgot we were supposed to get dinner. We ended up eating pizza on a park bench at 9 o'clock at night, and it was the best date I'd ever been on. She came to my football games without being asked, learned all my players' names within 3 weeks, remembered their jersey numbers and their positions, and asked about the ones who seemed to be struggling. She made signs for big games, brought snacks for the team, became the unofficial team mom even though we weren't even engaged yet. She had dinner with my family and fit into the chaos like she'd always been there, helping my mom in the kitchen, debating book recommendations with my dad, playing cards with my younger sister like they were old friends. My family is loud and opinionated, and sometimes exhausting, but Sophie loved every minute of it. She said it reminded her of her own family growing up. Big dinners where everyone talked over each other and nobody minded. My mom pulled me aside after that second dinner. She said Sophie wasn't trying to impress anyone or change anything. She just found her place naturally, like puzzle pieces that actually fit. No forcing, no adjusting, just clicking into place like it was always supposed to happen. Sophie was everything Claire wasn't. Not better or worse, but different in ways that mattered to me. She built things while Claire conquered them. She supported without competing. She saw partnership as collaboration instead of compromise. Loving her felt easy in a way I didn't know relationships could be. There was no scorekeeping, no power struggles, no feeling like I had to justify my existence in her life. She wanted me there. It was that simple. 10 months after we started dating, I proposed at a lighthouse on Cape Cod. The opposite of that steakhouse disaster in every possible way. No fancy restaurant, no pressure, no audience of strangers ready to witness my humiliation. Just us and the ocean, and a ring I'd picked out myself instead of inheriting. A simple band with a small diamond. Nothing flashy, just beautiful. She said yes before I even finished the question, laughing and crying at the same time. And I realized this is what it's supposed to feel like when two people want the same future. Not one person convincing the other. Not one person sacrificing while the other calculates. Just two people standing at the same place, pointing at the same horizon saying yes. That's where we're going. We got married 5 months later in a small ceremony, with family and close friends, and half my football team serving as unofficial ushers because they'd insisted on being involved. Those kids meant the world to me. They'd been there during the worst months after Claire left, even if they didn't know it. Their energy, their determination, their hunger to improve. It kept me going when I had nothing else. I wanted them at my wedding. Sophie understood that immediately. The ceremony was chaotic and perfect, and nothing like the wedding I'd once imagined with Claire. No elaborate planning, no stress about seating charts, no competition about who was more important, just people who loved us watching us love each other. That turned out to be exactly what I needed. I thought our paths had separated permanently, that Claire was living her successful life while I built mine. Parallel tracks that would never intersect again. Different worlds, different priorities, different definitions of what a good life looks like. Then something happened that cracked her world open and brought us face to face in the most uncomfortable way possible. The wedding announcement reached Claire through her paralegal. She was scrolling through the local news website during lunch break and found one of those community interest pieces about local educators tying the knot. She showed it to Claire casually, not knowing the history, just making conversation about people getting married young. The photo showed me and Sophie on the courthouse steps right after we'd filed for our marriage license, both of us grinning like idiots. Her hand on my chest, my arm around her waist, the kind of candid joy you can't manufacture. The article mentioned how we met through the school literacy program, our shared love of historical fiction, how I proposed at a lighthouse because Sophie loved the ocean. Normal life stuff. The kind of specific details that make a relationship real instead of theoretical. Claire excused herself to the bathroom and locked herself in a stall for 20 minutes, trying to breathe normally, trying to understand why her chest felt like it was caving in. The reaction confused her because it wasn't jealousy exactly, more like vertigo. Seeing concrete proof that I'd built everything she'd walked away from while she'd been billing hours and winning cases and climbing ladders. The happiness in that photo showed her the exact shape of what she'd traded away, and the exchange suddenly looked catastrophically unequal. She started noticing things at work she'd trained herself to ignore. Client meetings about divorce settlements with successful people explained how they'd let their marriages die through neglect and ambition. Prenuptial agreements for couples already hedging their bets before saying vows. Hours spent mediating disputes between people who used to love each other. Listening to them describe how work and individual goals had eroded partnership into resentment and scorekeeping. The irony wasn't subtle. She was legally dismantling relationships while understanding she dismantled her own for identical reasons. She was the expert witness to her own future. Every divorce case was a mirror showing her what she was becoming. Every client who described choosing work over marriage was telling her story before she finished living it. One case in particular destroyed something in her. A senior partner at another firm, whose wife was leaving after 30 years, sat in Claire's office and said his wife used to be his teammate in everything, that they built their success together, until he started treating her like staff instead of a partner. He described their early years, working late nights together on opposite ends of the same couch, celebrating each other's wins, building something as a unit. Then somewhere along the way it shifted. He started seeing her as support staff instead of a partner, started making unilateral decisions about their life, started assuming she'd always be there because she always had been. He took her for granted until she decided being alone was better than being invisible. He'd chosen the firm over her repeatedly for 3 decades, assumed she'd always be there waiting, and now she wasn't. Claire billed him $400 an hour to document his regrets in legal language, listening to this man describe exactly who she was becoming, exactly who she would be in 30 years if she didn't change something. The pro bono case landed on her desk 2 months after she saw my wedding announcement. An education funding lawsuit needed someone willing to donate serious hours, fighting budget cuts affecting public schools. She volunteered because it looked excellent for her partnership review, and because she genuinely cared about education access, even if she'd never admit the second part out loud. The case required consultation with school administrators across 3 districts to document the financial impact of proposed cuts. She was reviewing the contact list her assistant prepared when she saw my name, listed as history department head and athletic director. Her hands actually shook holding that paper, seeing my title, my office extension, my professional email address and bullet points. She convinced herself it was just work, that she could handle a professional meeting with an ex-boyfriend. That 3.5 years of distance made us strangers who used to know each other. Adults, professionals, capable of compartmentalizing. She'd done harder things than sit in a conference room with someone who once loved her. The meeting was scheduled at the district administration building, one of those aggressively ugly government structures from the 70s with fluorescent lighting that made everyone look sick and motivational posters about education changing lives. The carpet was that industrial gray that exists specifically in government buildings. The air smelled like old paper and coffee that had been sitting too long. She arrived early, overprepared, like always, carrying her litigation bag and laptop and enough documentation to bury a small country, ready to be professional, ready to be distant, ready to prove she'd moved on even though the tremor in her hands suggested otherwise. The receptionist directed her to Conference Room B, where I was already set up with budget reports and student impact assessments spread across the table. I looked different. Not physically, but energetically. More settled into myself. Comfortable in a way I'd never been when we were together. Less anxious, less trying to prove something, just present. I was reviewing recommendation letters I'd written for college-bound students when Sophie walked in carrying 2 coffees, visibly pregnant, wearing a dress that showed she was maybe 6 months along. She called me honey and asked if I was ready for lunch, and I lit up in a way that made Claire's chest physically ache. I stood immediately, took the coffee, guided Sophie to a chair with my hand on the small of her back. That unconscious protective gesture people make when they love someone. That simple movement said everything about who we'd become to each other. I introduced them professionally, keeping it neutral. Nate and Claire used to date. Claire is handling the pro bono education case. This is my wife, Sophie. She works at the Children's Library downtown. Sophie smiled with genuine warmth. No jealousy or territorial energy, just friendly appreciation for someone helping to defend school funding. She thanked Claire for taking the case, said it mattered enormously for the kids. That budget cuts would devastate programs my students desperately needed. Her sincerity was almost uncomfortable in its authenticity, like she actually meant every word instead of performing politeness. The meeting lasted 47 minutes of purely professional discussion. Financial projection, program elimination, student-to-teacher ratios. I walked Claire through the data methodically, explained which cuts would hurt most, provided documentation she could use in court. Between budget line items, I mentioned casually that I was finishing my dissertation on educational policy history, that I'd been working on it for 3 years while teaching full-time and coaching. Sophie helped by editing my drafts and managing our daughter so I could write on weekends. Our daughter, Lily, who just turned 2 and was obsessed with dinosaurs and refused to wear anything except her purple boots. Claire asked about the pregnancy because social convention demanded it, and I told her we were hoping for another girl but honestly just wanted healthy, that Lily was already planning to be the best big sister in history. I don't know how I got this lucky, I said, showing her a photo on my phone of Lily covered in finger paint at daycare. Pure chaotic toddler joy frozen in pixels. That comment landed like a physical blow. Not because I meant it cruelly, but because the happiness was so completely genuine. I'd found everything Claire had convinced herself didn't exist. The partnership that enhanced instead of competed. The family that supported instead of drained. The life that felt full instead of empty. She drove back to her apartment in downtown Boston afterward, took the elevator to the 32nd floor, Walked into her spotless high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. The view cost a fortune and meant absolutely nothing to her in that moment. She sat on her designer couch and stared at the wall for 3 hours without moving. The education case went to trial 6 weeks later. Claire won. The school district got their funding restored. My students kept their programs. She sent me a professional email letting me know the outcome. I replied with a simple thank you. That was the last direct contact we ever had. But I kept hearing things through the grapevine. The mutual friends who drifted away during our breakup started reaching out again once word spread about the conference room meeting. They wanted to check on me, make sure I was okay, and they couldn't help but share what they knew about Claire. 2 months after the trial, she lost a major client, missed a filing deadline because she'd been up for 72 hours straight, and her brain just stopped working. The senior partners called her into a meeting and told her she needed to get her life together, that she was becoming a liability instead of an asset. She'd never failed at anything in her life. This was her first taste of what burnout actually looked like. She took a week off, her first vacation in 4 years, went to her parents' house and slept for 3 days straight. Her mother told her she looked like a ghost. Her father asked when the last time was that she'd eaten a real meal. She couldn't remember. Meanwhile, Sophie and I welcomed our second daughter, named her Grace. She came into the world screaming at 2 in the morning and hasn't stopped talking since. Lily was obsessed with her baby sister from day one, kept trying to share her dinosaur toys with a newborn who couldn't even hold her head up yet. I finished my dissertation that spring, defended it in front of a committee while running on 4 hours of sleep, because Grace had been up all night with an ear infection. Sophie sat in the back row holding both girls, keeping them quiet with goldfish crackers and sheer willpower. When the committee announced I'd passed, she stood up and cheered so loud they probably heard her 3 buildings over. Lily yelled, "Congratulations, Daddy," at the top of her lungs. Grace started crying because everyone was being too loud. It was chaos. It was perfect. The school board promoted me to assistant principal the following fall, youngest in the district's history. Funny how that worked out. Claire got youngest partner. I got youngest AP. Different tracks. Different destinations. A year after that, I heard Claire had a complete breakdown at work, started crying during a client meeting and couldn't stop. Her assistant found her on the floor of her office at midnight, just sitting there staring at nothing. The firm put her on indefinite leave, told her to take some time to figure things out. She resigned 3 months later, walked away from everything she'd sacrificed us for, sold the high-rise apartment, moved into a small place outside the city, started doing legal aid work for people who couldn't afford attorneys, made a quarter of what she used to make, worked normal hours for the first time in her adult life. One of our mutual friends ran into her at a coffee shop about 6 months after she quit the firm, said she looked different, softer somehow, less like a weapon and more like a person. She asked about me. The friend told her I was good, really good. 3 kids now, still teaching, still coaching, still happy. Claire nodded and said she was glad, that she'd been thinking about things, that she'd made a lot of mistakes she couldn't take back, but she was trying to build something different now, something smaller but more real. I don't know if she ever found what she was looking for. We don't run in the same circles anymore, but I hope she did. Not because I'm some kind of saint, because holding on to anger is exhausting, and I've got better things to do with my energy, like teaching my son to throw a football, like reading bedtime stories until my voice goes hoarse, like falling asleep on the couch with Sophie while some kid's movie plays in the background. Sophie and I have 3 kids now. Lily just turned 7 and still refuses to wear anything except clothes with dinosaurs on them. Grace is 4 and wants to be a librarian like mommy. Our son Jack is 2 and thinks everything is hilarious, especially the word banana for some reason. Guys, we are so close to hit 100,000 subscribers on this channel. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. It really helps hit that 100,000 mark. Thanks for making this dream come true.